Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
Very good evening and good morning to each one of you. First of all, I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists who are super experts in their own field, and I'm not going to take much time as far as opening remarks are concerned. There were some issues which I thought maybe we could focus on today, and the first one, which as per me, is that the entire world is today discussing Trump. So it is probably the first time that we are discussing, along with a change of elections, the personality of the president, which is kind of making people a little more uncertain, a little more, I would say they're not very sure how the future is going to go. I would like all of you to focus on that. Do we have some opportunities between India and the US, given the kind of flux which is now taking place in the geopolitical environment? The second question is about the Indo-US defense and security ties, which was the subject of discussion yesterday, especially in the light of the fact that there have been impediments to our defense procurements because of various reasons, some on the part of US, some on part of India. So how can we speed up? Are we going to see a fast tracking of those, given the fact that Mr. Modi and Trump both enjoy a fairly good relationship, but only time can say after the meeting, which is probably going to take place in the month of February, as to where we are heading as far as our defense procurement issues are concerned. It holds a lot of promise, but again, it's very difficult to predict the future. So in this kind of a complex, ambiguous environment, let us see what you all have to offer to us. So over to you, without taking any further time. Over to you, Tara, and just carry on from here.
Yeah, I think as usual, the general has said everything that we need to say, which direction we are going. I'm just going to quickly just say that in the last, say, a month, less than, but that we've seen both good and bad, right? We've seen some real good stuff with India. The first meeting was with India. The Quad meeting took place. Jai Shankar sitting in the front row. Okay, thank you very much. All that sort of stuff. But we also, as we said, in fact, the trade, in fact, has gone up hugely. You're close, US-China neck to neck as far as trade is concerned. I hope Richard Rossow will talk a little more about that. So defense ties were robust, but I think what we need to focus on here is by early 24, in fact, the Indo-US ties were kind of sort of things were not moving as fast as they should have. A couple of issues occurred. He didn't come for the Republic Day parade. All that was going on. So towards 24, things were not that great. So from looking from there, let's see how it goes. So we need not sort of make it a black and white thing. It is things that could change from now on. It's not from a high that anything is happening. There is also, of course, all of us know the Project 2025, where India has a major role in that whole scenario. But whether that role, as India as a major counterpoint against China, is something that we are going to be comfortable with is another issue. How does this work? Particularly, we'd like to focus on how the whole Indo-Pacific thing is going. Because I think for him, that continues to be a major concern, not for Trump himself, but for his cabinet around him. They are very focused on this. They're focused on IMEC. They're focused on India, but like I said, in a role which we'll have to see. So I would invite Ambassador Shringla, if you could go first.
Well, thank you, Tara, and thanks to Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh, Mr. M K Narayanan sir, our fellow panelists, all of whom are good friends, and everybody else on this webinar. So when we talk about the Trump administration, China and India, I think we have to look for variables. I mean, there is a certain constant, but there are significant variables. One, of course, is the advent of Trump himself on the US foreign policy scene that has changed the entire scenario significantly. I would say not completely, but significantly. On the other hand, I think we have also reached a certain level of rapprochement with China after 5 years since the Galwan incidents in 2020. And that also is a variable. Now, I think to understand how the Trump administration would proceed vis-a-vis its relationship with India, with China, and with regard to the general focus on the Indo-Pacific, I think we have to look briefly at Trump 1.0. And I think here, of course, what I would say was that, the Trump administration followed a policy of a certain level of strategic assertiveness, so strategic assertion of sorts in which they followed a robust foreign policy, one of which was a strong bid to focus on China and in many senses to contain China's I would say very rapid sort of inroads that they were making with regard to a number of factors, whether it's defense or whether it is the economy. One aspect I think we all noted very significantly was the fact that he spoke about tariffs and then went on to impose unilaterally 25% additional tariffs on $360 billion of Chinese imports. So that was very significant. From our point of view, I think what is very significant is that it is Trump that revived a relatively moribund Quad. I mean, he started level meetings, then foreign minister level meetings, and then Biden took it that next step forward by starting a summit level engagement vis-a-vis the Quad. But I think what is noteworthy is that in his conversation with Prime Minister Modi, President Trump has referred to the Quad and the fact that the summit will take place in India later this year. So there is a certain continuity even in the Quad summit. The nomenclature Indo-Pacific was, I think, really brought to the global lexicon by Trump when he changed the name of the Pacific Command in Hawaii to the Indo-Pacific Command. And then we saw that other countries also emulated the Indo-Pacific concept. I mean, Europe, the UK, Netherlands, a whole range of countries adopted an Indo-Pacific policy, Japan, Australia. So Indo-Pacific became a common reference, and by doing that, he brought in India and the Pacific within one sort of zone of consideration. And of course, I think from our point of view, and I'm sure Gen Murugan will speak on this, but focus on the defense aspects, increasing interoperability, the STA1 tier status, which gave us more access to technology and other areas. Again, from a security and India-China standpoint, he supported us on counterterrorism, including when it came to China being obdurate in listing known terrorists in the UN Security Council's 1267 list, like Masood Azhar, and we pushed it through with strong US support. Disa will remember that, and I think we worked closely in many of these areas. So essentially, Trump 1.0 was a very robust manifestation of foreign policy vis-a-vis China, and very supportive of India in many senses. And we had our challenges, but I think you can safely say that the relationship is one that was very much tilted in our favor. Don't forget that Trump also stopped military assistance to Pakistan. Many presidents threatened to do it, but Trump actually went and did it. So that is the difference. Now in Trump 2.0, what are the signs? I think one sign is that much of his cabinet, or many members of his cabinet, are very strong in terms of their, let's say, positions on China. And they refer to as China baiters, whether it is Secretary Marco Rubio, whether it is NSA, Mike Waltz. They have strong views, and I think that is one factor that is there. The second, of course, is the legislation with regard to which Senator Rubio introduced earlier in his earlier incarnation last year, which seeks to have India as a notional member of NATO, which means that we would be given the same status as NATO in terms of defense equipment purchases, technology, and on the strategic side of things, which is positive. The third, of course, is the focus on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, Trump's stated policy to put an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I think, is to some extent very much in convergence with our own policy, that this is not an era of war, that we need to use diplomacy and dialogue to achieve peace. And that, of course, from that perspective, one of our concerns was when this entire issue with regard to Russia and Ukraine began, was that we would lose focus, or the international community led by the US would lose focus on the Indo-Pacific. And I think willy-nilly that did happen, because that was a distraction. If Trump is successful in including a sort of a ceasefire in Europe as he did with the Middle East, I think one of the outcomes from our point of view would be that we would have a much greater focus on the Indo-Pacific and on China. And I think that is very good for us. So, the revival of the Quad, focus on the Indo-Pacific, that is there. And I want to just complete my intervention by bringing about two imponderables, which I would be very interested in getting the views of our other panelists on, which I think is important, is that will the Trump administration allow for strategic autonomy? Will they be a little more, or more, I would say, specific when it comes to assertions of working more closely with the US on strategic and security-related outcomes? So far, I think we have been in the comfortable position of being able to straddle, as we say, the North and South and East and West. So strategic autonomy is something that is an important part of our foreign policy. What would be Trump's approach in that regard? And I think this is something that I would leave for the my fellow panelists, many of whom would have better insights. And the other point is that how will the US-China relationship evolve? I mean, we see a mixed message when it comes from Trump. On the one hand, I think he has been very, very vociferous on high tariffs and the need to impose, from 60 to 100% enhanced tariffs on China, on the issue of China's assertiveness, etc. On the other hand, he's spoken of Xi Jinping as his friend, that he can work out a deal, that that he's reasonable. So there is there are both sides to it. Does it mean that there could be a deal, and a deal could lead to even a closer relationship? Where does that leave us? Where does that leave the Quad? Or does it mean that this level of intense, I would say, rivalry, if I can put it that way, the policy of containing China would continue, or would it be a bit of both? I mean, this is where I think we need to watch that space. I think these are two issues that are talked about a bit, especially the second point when it comes to India's strategic, I would say, concerns, is that where is the US headed vis-a-vis China? So I'll just leave it there, Tara, and we're interested in, of course, what you and others have to say. Thank you.
Lisa, perhaps you could take these questions, these excellent two questions, within the time.
Frankly, if you consider the fact that the Trump administration has only been in for 11 days, I think it's actually quite remarkable what's already happened on U.S.-India relations. Look, Secretary of State Rubio's first meeting as Secretary of State was with the Quad foreign ministers. He had bilateral meetings with all of the Quad foreign ministers. And this is a strong signal. This really shows that the Indo-Pacific will be a priority for this administration, that the Quad will remain that central pillar of engagement for the United States. And of course, as Ambassador Shringla mentioned, the Quad was originally revived during the Trump administration. So it's not surprising that they will continue to invest heavily in this Quad mechanism. So I think the second major thing that has happened is the phone call between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi on Monday. And according to the White House readout of that call, they have discussed global security issues, reducing the U.S. trade deficit with India, including through President Trump has made clear he hopes to see Indian purchases of American military equipment. Now, how that will square with India's, Make in India and how that comes out, we've yet to see. But I think, it's significant that we're likely to see Modi visiting Washington within the next 2 months. So I think, with everything that's happening domestically, the fact that this early focus on India is happening is quite remarkable. And I think India is playing its hand smartly. Prime Minister Modi, senior Indian officials have learned from dealing with the first Trump administration. And I just remember, going way back to 2017 in the first Trump term, it was the former late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was kind of seen as the Trump whisperer and really understood, how to make that connection and forge that relationship. Well, I think now we can safely say it's Prime Minister Modi that has taken on this mantle of sort of being, the Trump whisperer and understanding how to make that connection and have that relationship. And, as Tara was saying, the two leaders forged a very close relationship during Trump's first term. They are a lot alike. I think there's a lot of mutual respect there and mutual understanding. And that does, of course, facilitate the overall strategic relationship. Clearly, the Trump team is prioritizing relations with India. It recognizes that India is, this very important global power that really can help transform the Indo-Pacific, can help, push back against Chinese aggression, can help the U.S. Compete effectively with China. Both India and the United States have a mutual interest in cooperating so that they can meet these challenges from China that's growing rapidly, both in military and economic terms and in terms of global influence. The question, I think, is, and Ambassador Shringla alluded to this, is, can India and the United States, take some kind of major initiative that would really capture the imagination of the world, make clear that this relationship is set for new heights over the next 4 years. There's certainly more we can do to improve security ties. The first Trump administration was, very supportive of India during its time of crisis. 5 years ago, the India-China border crisis. I think that was appreciated in India and helped to, solidify that security relationship. But of course, there's far more that we can do now. And so hopefully we'll see investment in Navy-to-Navy cooperation, maritime security, seeing India being able to maintain that dominant position in the Indian Ocean region as China is increasing its influence and presence in the region. The technology front, I think, all signs point to a continuation of the ISET dialogue. It might be called something different. It might be repackaged, but, we have very capable officials, people like David Feith, who is NSC Senior Director for Technology, taking Tarun Chabra's position. He's somebody who's been, very involved in, the ISET dialogue and the technology cooperation that we've seen. Somebody who understands how important that technology cooperation is between the U.S. and India. But, is there something that the two countries can do on AI? This is, the major issue that we're looking at right now. Is there something that we can push forward that would demonstrate that the U.S. and India really are cooperating on these issues of global impact? And also, I think we can expect to see movement on the Middle East, I2U2, IMEC. These are issues that go hand in hand with the Trump administration's goals in the Middle East, with the Abraham Accords that the Trump administration is recognized for, really breakthrough initiative in the Middle East. So I can see, major movement on these types of issues. Now, when it comes to China, I think, we will see a fairly nuanced approach, because of President Trump's, personal engagement with President Xi. There's already been the phone call last Friday. Trump invited President Xi to his inauguration. Of course, the vice president showed up, not President Xi. The fact that President Trump has put out there he wants to visit China, this all points to a President Trump that wants to see an improvement in U.S.-China relations. He wants to make some kind of trade deal. But people like National Security Advisor Waltz, Secretary of State Rubio, and their advisors will be pressing these policies to ensure the U.S. can compete with China. So they're going to be pressing for more export controls, more restrictions on U.S. investments into China, more ways to develop alternative supply chains for critical minerals and technologies. They will be sending clear signals about U.S. willingness to defend Taiwan, which has already, of course, gotten Secretary of State Rubio into trouble in his dealings with China. But he's not going to be backing away from those strong positions. So we have to see how this sort of plays out. And we did have a similar situation in the first Trump administration. Many people forget, but in the first few years of the Trump administration, there was a tussle between some of the hawks like Vice President Pence or Secretary of State Pompeo, who were very skeptical of China. But then you had economic advisors like Secretary Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow and others who wanted to, have a economic deal with China, and were in touch with U.S. companies who that China-U.S. economic relationship was so important for. So I think we can expect, similar sort of battles being fought out in the interagency that we saw last time, but of course at a much more intensive level, given all of the focus on China that we see. And I just want to make one comment on Ambassador Shringla's points on Russia and Ukraine. Certainly, President Trump wants to see the Ukraine war end. However, I would just advise looking closely at the tweets he's made in the last few days, maybe last week, rather. It's clear that he expects Russia to play a role when it comes to ending this war. So I would say the major question is, what is Putin going to do? Is he going to be willing to end the war without getting his maximalist goals? Because certainly President Trump is not going to allow him to achieve his maximalist goals, annexing Ukraine, and, security guarantees will have to be given to Ukraine because we can't simply be in a position where Russia does the same thing a few years later. And, President Trump recognizes that. I think he recognizes that he doesn't want to be the president that, hands a country over to Russia. And that would certainly not be acceptable to the American public and would severely damage his reputation, his legacy. We have to remember he only has one term, so he's already going to be thinking about his legacy. And whereas I think he does sincerely want to be seen as sort of a peacemaker, he's not going to do that in a way that makes him or the United States look weak. So I'll just stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks very much. Lots and lots of interesting points. I'll go quickly to Aparna. Aparna, if you could just focus on what Ambassador Shringla was talking about, because that's a subject which we've been talking within the circles as well. This question of strategic autonomy, how is that going to work out? Particularly given, supposing you have a SCO meeting or a BRICS summit, what kind of pressures would you see after that? That is one. And how will you work around that? And the fact that, as Lisa was saying, if the Ukraine deal is not going to go that easily as most people think, do you think that India could play a role eventually as a as a mediator? That's just 2 points. You can take up on any of them you like.
It's good that you asked me to speak on something else, because everything Lisa said is what I would have said. I would have only added 2 points, one on trade and tariffs, which is going to be a big issue, and the second on immigration. Because Trump 1.0, India did not have an immigration problem. Not just the H-1B, the legal immigration, but even the illegal, which is about 725,000 to about 100,000 illegal Indian. And so and both trade, tariff and immigration are big for Trump 2.0. They are big domestically, and Lisa knows how well domestic politics impacts foreign policy. And so I have a concern on the immigration and trade front. But I'll tackle the question you asked, Taraji. And so, I would have started my talk saying that India's ideal world order is a multipolar world order, where India is able to retain strategic autonomy. India's challenge is going to be 3 things. One, this is a return of great power politics. It is a great return of great power politics, not just like the Cold War, because in the Cold War, the United States was stronger economically and militarily. And the Soviet Union, while having military strength, wasn't as powerful economically. Today, however, the 2 countries which are involved in great power politics, China is very strong economically, militarily, and technologically. It's not like the Soviet Union was in the Cold War. So the US has a stronger rival at a time when the United States is not as strong economically, though it is still strong militarily and technologically. So the challenge is going to be faced by all middle powers in the world. It's not a question of choosing sides. It's a question of when 2 elephants fight, the grass gets cumbled in between, and all bushes get hurt as well, get damaged as well. And so countries will need to pick and choose, and sometimes will be forced to do things they may not have wanted to do, if only to avoid coming in the limelight, coming in direct focus of either of the 2 countries. So let's say, based on what Lisa said, which is accurate, that there are these 2 camps within the US government, on the China hawks and the China realists, those who would like to say, accept the fact that China is, economic and militarily powerful. Let's just balance and manage our, our relationship with China, versus those who want to push back against China. Where does India and where do the other countries come in this? Based on where the US-China relationship and the adjustment goes in the economic and military and technological side, it will have an impact on India in different ways. One, India is improving its relationship with China, but at the end of the day, India is not either geographically far away from China that it can do what it wants. 2, unlike the US, India, China have a territory issue, and India doesn't have the economic or military might to stand up to China. So if the China realists win the debate within the United States, then India's strategic autonomy will help India, because India's building up its economic and military muscle will help it in the long run. But I am concerned, and my concerns and I'll throw them back as questions to everybody to think about. One, President Trump last week, I believe, and I think that's what Lisa was referring to, threatened sanctions on Russia if President Putin did not help bring the Ukraine conflict to an end. If sanctions are imposed on Russia, as the country which imports more Russian oil, India is going to have challenges. And if sanctions are imposed on Russia, there's already a pre-existing CATSA sanction, which is there, which the Congress can choose to impose if they want. They have not done so deliberately. India has got away by avoiding sanctions which could come its way. Will that remain in Trump 2.0 based on where sort of, what the sanctions come on Russia? Second, he has threatened sanctions on BRICS. His point of view, countries sort of, he doesn't like multilateral groupings where the United States is not playing a role. And so sort of whether sort of, if he can threaten sanctions on, or, sort of on Colombia, which is one of the oldest and closest trading partners of the United States over deportees, immigrants. If he decides to impose sanctions on BRICS, that includes India, that includes Russia, that includes many countries India has trade relations with. So, and my third concern is broader within sort of, a question about allies and partners. It was, we live in a world today where allies and partnerships matter more, and and India is more closely aligned to the United States than it ever was. But the president does not really, at some level, his advisors he doesn't see the value of partnerships and alliances. He doesn't really believe that they bring anything. He believes that partners and allies have actually hurt the United States economically, and that partners and allies need to do more burden sharing. So even if India is not an ally, the demand to buy more economically, buy more on the military front, and play a bigger role where it is, and I still recall, I think Lisa will recall this as well, in Trump 1.0, when he met Prime Minister Modi and he complained about the libraries in Afghanistan. When there were no libraries that India was, it was basically schools. So he doesn't believe in soft power. He doesn't believe in public goods. He believes in economic and military, and in something which demonstrates that you are doing something and carrying part of the burden which the United States, he believes, should not have to carry. I will stop there after throwing out all these random thoughts to get some conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. That was not random. They were very, very specific, pointed answers, and thank you so much for that. I'm going to shift to the Major General Murugan, because especially in terms of, Mark Rubio's that act which he had proposed, which I think Lisa referred to, where they wanted to bring us up as a near NATO kind of ally, whether that will go through, keeping in mind that so far no great technology has come to us. So, major thing that we've asked for, like General Dushyant was saying, our Sea Guardians took ages. The Predator is still somewhere away. The engines which we've been promised are not to be seen at all. The existing engine deal is in limbo. We're not getting enough. So given that kind of reality, and also given the fact that the administration is likely to be in complete flux for the foreseeable future till all this civil service problems are sorted out, who's going where, who's going being thrown out, who's not. How do we see this going? I mean, do we see any forward movement likely in the military sphere?
So, to my mind, a lot of things will remain the same, because there are two non-debatable issues in this. One is that there is bipartisan support for India-US military relationship, and for strong India-military-US relationship. And we have seen this, as Ambassador Shringla had said, that even in the first Trump government, that was manifest, and that is unlikely to change. Now, the issues which you have raised, I would like to answer this in three parts. And the first one is that, one, the strategic collaboration in terms of partners, or the term which we don't use much in the Indian security diaspora, that is alliances. And the next would be, of course, capacity building in terms of defense technology procurements. And the third is interactions, military to military interactions. So coming to the first one, which has already been covered, as far as the strategic collaboration goes, The main one which the US looks at is the Indo-Pacific and the Quad. The problem in this is, to my mind, is that our relationship with China from a security point of view is on the land borders. And in the land borders, you're going to fight alone. Whereas when you look at it, the cooperation and collaboration which are being sought are going to be in the maritime domain. And maritime domain, the reason being that there are common security interests in the maritime domain, and therefore these groupings take importance as far as the other countries in the Quad go, and especially US. As far as the Indian response, as you said, near NATO status, we as it is do not want to be, to my mind, from a security perspective, to be classified as an alliance partner and to be classified into the grouping of NATO or a formal Quad partner in terms of carrying out those activities which are expected from us in terms of the US focus on in the Indo-Pacific, joint patrols, freedom of navigation movements. Those are things which I do not think that we are that comfortable with. What we would be wanting from our perspective is more movements in the Indian Ocean, to probably more activities in the Indian Ocean to counter the creeping presence and the increasing creeping presence of the Chinese Navy there. But as far as our requirement on the land frontiers go, is primarily systems, weapon systems, intelligence, and technology. So in that, we come to the defense procurement and the defense technology. You have said that, right? But today there was an article in the Times of India specifically on this. And it stated, it had given that it's only the formalities are left now for the joint production of jet engines, with 80% technology transfer. The MQ-9 Reaper acquisition is signed, and it's a matter of deliveries now, which has to happen. In terms of procurements, again, over $25 billion worth of procurements have happened from the US since 2010. It's not the last few years, but since 2010, there have been over $25 billion procurement. There are a number of platforms in which we are engaging in from a technological perspective. One, of course, the DTTI is old news, but in addition to that, we have now got the IndusX, the Accelerated Development Program. Then you have got the CET, Critical Emerging Technologies. The thing is that none of this are leading to a product, which is a jointly developed product. And the reason for that is two. One, when you come and you discuss this, because being part of a number of these DTTI discussions, the US views it as a defense trade technology initiative. We view it as a defense technology trade initiative. So we are looking at technology coming in along with the trade which happens. But a technology which has already been developed, the US is not interested in co-developing it. So a lot of times we are fighting with legacy equipment. We are fighting with 80% of the forces fight with legacy equipment. If you're fighting with legacy equipment, you require legacy technologies also. Our requirement is more in the legacy technologies, in the industrial age technologies, whether it be engines, whether it be metallurgy, whether it be transmissions. So these are technologies which are important, and it is important because you cannot leapfrog it. You need to go through it, you need to acquire it, you need to be proficient in manufacture of that. So that is a requirement, and that is something which we are finding it extremely difficult to get. In fact, I'm not too sure how right this article is. It says that there has been, some things have changed from the first Trump regime. Then the major change as far as defense procurement and defense production is the strong push for indigenization. So that is going to be a matter of friction as far as the US goes, because they look at sales directly, and we are looking at co-production, or rather indigenous, setting up facilities and transferring technology for domestic production. So that is not going to be resolved easily, because in this money is involved, in this competitive practices are involved. Some of the low-hanging fruit in this is generally there has been a propensity for companies to share technology which they have outgrown. So I would feel that those low-hanging fruits need to be grasped. So that is one thing which I would say that we would have to identify those. We are unlikely to get. If you want systems, I am sure with the lower entry barriers as far as technology goes, which has happened in Indo-US relations, you will get the systems. But whether we want systems as flyaway kits and just being assembled here, or would we want to make it? That is the point where there are going to be departure in views. So I'm not too sure this is going to get hastened up in this in the second iteration of the Trump government. I think the space is going to be generally slow because these are systemic. They are not based on administrative pushes which are given in this. So these
I think that's actually what you're making is a very good point in terms of systemic, right? It is something which may continue from president to president.
Absolutely.
And it may not. But I'd really like Lisa to come in on that. Lisa, would you like to comment on that?
I think, yeah, we should pay attention to the fact that in the phone call, President Trump emphasized, his interest in seeing American-made equipment sold to India. And, it does strike me that there's been, no major sale in recent years. And it also strikes me that the MQ-9 sale took 7 years to complete. So I think, I'm not sure, how we move this forward, but, I would just be curious if, Major General Ravi, if you think there are potentially major deals that could move forward, if the right export control policies are put in place in the United States. I know Secretary of State Rubio is interested in being able to supply our allies and partners with the capabilities they need and overcoming these export control hurdles. But to do this, I think they will have to think there's something in it for the United States. It's not a one-way street. So, if the U.S. moves mountains to change some of these export control policies, what is the Trump administration going to get in return from India?
No, my point was exactly this. Sales is not the issue. The US selling and India buying would not be a major factor. The issue is of the technology transfers, because and the technology transfers, what I'm trying to say is that there are certain technologies which the US and the companies would be willing to transfer, and we would be willing to take that, because as I said, technology proficiency has to be grown. It cannot leapfrog generations. So there are a number of such systems, but for that we require the actual transfer of technology to take place, and that has generally not been happening. So yes, there are multiple areas where we can identify that, and these are existing, and these are probably the lowest hanging fruits. But sales, I don't think will be a major issue. I don't think we'll be buying also if there is no transfer involved.
So, Aparna, do you want to come in on this whole MAGA versus Make in India versus Atmanirbhar, that kind of thing? Basically, it's a tension between these two, right? So how do we work around this?
I'll keep my answer short. It is a tension, it will remain. I mean, it's both are. India has always been protectionist. The US is turning protectionist. So semi-protectionist societies, populist politics, very popular populist nationalist leaders, and sort of, both countries one country did not historically, at least for the last few decades, seek to build inside. The US was, a country which believed in globalization. No longer applies. And so my concern is, will French shoring still, or will near shoring and onshoring be demanded? And if onshoring and near shoring is demanded, and even Canada and Mexico, you cannot build and then manufacture, and you to manufacture inside the United States, then India will have a challenge. And General Saab, I understand that, India seeks transfer of technology and indigenization. The challenge that is going to be is that the US cannot ask companies to transfer their technology, because it is not the US government which owns that technology, it's that company which does. And so that company needs to feel that it is also making money, and that it gets something out of transferring its high-end technology or sharing its high-end technology with an Indian company. And in Indian public sector, it may be reluctant to do so. an Indian private company possible, but it would need a return on investment. It would need money and sort of this transfer technology would need to be beneficial for both sides in order for the company to do it and in order for the United States government to even sort of, go down that path. That's all. I'll stop there.
Okay, so this segues right to Richard Rossow. Richard, would you like to come in now, focusing primarily on the whole tariff war, US-China, US-India? How is this going to work out in future? How do both sides handle it, despite the clear, I think, intention that US-India relations have to be closer and have to go forward?
Yeah, we're in a very dangerous circle in that front because the United States has a trade deficit, which is, 2 or 3% of our GDP. And both political parties have become very anti-trade because of that. India's trade deficit ranges between 8 and 12% of GDP. So I think that the Trump administration will certainly put a lot of pressure on India to roll back some of the protectionist measures that we've seen, to buy more American products. And I think to the general's point, and others, the government of India, they only control buying stuff in bulk in a couple of areas, hydrocarbons and defense. Those are the two main tools the government has to directly make changes to what we see with the trade flows. So, but India can only go too far because they're working against a trade deficit that is far larger than America's. I do think there's a level of nuance when we talk about Make America Great Again and Make in India, where it could be somewhat complementary, but you've got to get to the details, right? When you look at India and the PLI programs, they're trying to build a lot of new material. And if the United States can think about a way to package exports of the capital equipment, that's going to go into the factories that make that stuff. When we talk about exporting the raw materials and the intermediate goods. So I think there's ways, but it gets to a level of detail that sometimes, when you've got heads of state meeting, they don't always get there. But I do think that there's some complementarity between the two. The last thing I'll mention, it is an American strategic priority, I think, to make sure that just like we do in defense, we don't want India to buy so much from Russia. And therefore, we've been willing to offer transfer of technologies, at least try to expedite that, because we're not going to replace Russia. India is going to replace Russia for making a lot of defense equipment. We'll sell some, but helping India make its own is the best way to get India off of buying so much from Russia. And I would say the same thing happens in strategic technologies. And there, the target is China. So if our goal is to maybe sell a bit more if India buys less from China, but also help India make some, that is 15% of the world's economy, what we expect to be, in the next 20 years, the Indian market represents. And if China can't thrive on that, it's inherently good for the United States, inherently good for security in the region. So just a few thoughts there, Tara. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Mr. Narayanan, would you come in? I was hesitating on pain of rebuke because he said he'll come in last. But we'd really like to hear you now, Mr. Narayanan.
What I would like to do to begin with, I've made a few points, what I thought critical points made by each of the speakers. And General Dushyant Singh started with. And he started with a great deal of what I call hope in terms of India-US relations with the Trump-Modi relationship. But I think if I read him correctly, reading between the lines, there was a certain amount of caution as to whether we should not pitch our hopes too high. And that is a running theme which many others, I think Ravi Murugan made that particularly clear. And the point is that perhaps because we are discussing in the context of relations and Lisa is here, there's a general trend of being trend of favoring very close and very warm relationship between India and the United States. Yes, India-US relations have been improving steadily over the years, but presidents have a very critical role to play. And I have not had anything to do with President Trump. But whatever you read about what he has done in the past, whether we believe, I find that he is a firm believer in a transactional relationship. And I think that is where the issue is really going to come to problems. Yes, I think he's favorable towards India. When you come to the critical aspects that are there, you will nearly need to see that how do you deal with it. I remember at one point, I think it was General Murugan's point, when he talked in terms of equipment, legacy equipment. And it's true, this has been the problem. Long before I became the National Security Advisor, when I was head of the intelligence, and my relations with the United States were on the up and down at various stages. And the critical point was not about the future, but about the present. We faced, I was part of the guilty men of 1962. So you can imagine them. And that was when the first major shock came to us, when we wanted particular types of equipment, current equipment. The United States is been quite free in offering, saying that we will come and help you do something for the war on various things. But we want many things here and now, and that's not always been happening. So I would like to start off by saying that we need to be cautious in the kind of relationship. My own assessment is, as I said, mine is an ancient mind. I think the relationship between India and the United States under Trump, with Mr. Modi, on whatever warmth there is in the relationship, I see President Trump seeing his relations with India as transactional and not a fundamental relationship. General Murugan talked in terms of about legacy equipment and how the US, when it comes to that point, is always unwilling to go beyond a particular level kind of thing. You will, to overcome that, you will need presidential intervention. Mm-hmm. And I say this with regard to, yes, there have been, the India-US nuclear deal is clearly an example where the United States went out of the way. I mean, whatever work we on the Indian side did, I was the pointsman for the deal. I can say that President Bush managed the entire relationship, and he had a great deal of faith in Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. But it required a president not merely making, statements, but intervening at every stage. There were 11 times when the president overruled the State Department and the Department of Energy, wherever there was a case. So do we have that kind of a relationship with Trump? And can you have that kind of relationship with Mr. Trump? Because he's an entirely different person. So I would like to say that at the bottom line, I think, in our relationship with under President, when US is under President Trump, would be transaction. I don't think that he's a great India lover in many ways. When President Obama was there, and it was a revelation to see the way he dealt with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. These are people who had fundamental interests in India and sort of strengthening India and building. And I would say, is President Trump a person of that kind? My feeling is that he is not. And I don't know whether Mr. Rossow or Lisa will say something to the contrary. And I'm not saying this in a spirit of criticism. That's how he is. That's how he has got it. And to that extent, I would say that irrespective of what he has said about Russia and whatnot, I think that he will strike a deal with Russia on Ukraine. Something I don't think any other US president would be willing to do, because it's transaction. He'll want something in return if Putin is willing to go. And since I've met President Putin on several occasions, he's another great deal maker. So it's not beyond the realm of, and he doesn't have a parliament, or he doesn't have a critical group beyond to that. So I think these are two transaction makers on that. Then at one stage, Lisa said that he was expecting Prime Minister Modi to take the role that Shinzo Abe had. Much as I would like Prime Minister Modi to do that, Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Modi are two entirely different individuals. I mean, Shinzo Abe he's a Harsh Shringla many times over in many ways. In the way that he can deal with people, how he can take the points point by point. And I'm coming to the point that while there are many interesting possibilities, I would be careful to be over optimistic as to what we can achieve. I think he honestly believes that disruption and unpredictability is an art of high-level diplomacy. I mean, he honestly believes it. If you read what he has said in the past, I've looked at many things that he has said in Trump 1.0. Two, if the way he treats President Biden, who I think did something good for the United States of America, if we really look at it in terms of the economy and whatnot, I think he doesn't believe in it. He wants a complete break with the past. So whatever President Biden has done, I would think that he would try to undo what has happened. And I don't think that he's sort of completely captivated by any previous doctrine or doctrinal formulation. So when I know Shringla said in point and that Trump 1.0 did a number of favorable things too. Yes, that is at the moment. So I'm not too sure that you should take that as a guiding light or the signpost as to what is he going to do this time. So I would be a little careful in overstressing the. I think you're dealing with a man who is with a bit of an iconoclast. He will like to break many things. He would not like to adhere to, and whether his Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor advises him in a particular direction or not, he will deal with issues in what he thinks is a very pragmatic and what in his eyes a strategic way. I don't think he wants to be a visionary leader. He does not wish to be remembered as somebody who did. Brought in a new idea, a new thought, and whatnot. And I think he wants to be numero uno of the world. He makes no secret of the fact. If you do not accept it, I will not deal with you. So I think we have to be careful. His relations with us will remain essentially transactional. And I think that is going to be the problem. Shringla made a particular point about strategic autonomy. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to make President Trump realize that strategic autonomy is something that independent nations wish to have. And I don't think he understands that. And we will have a problem. On Quad, as I think General Murugan said, we are not interested very much in policing the waters in the Pacific. We are conditioned to support the United States because the open seas issue is something we all believe in. But I don't think the Quad we see as an alliance by which we will ensure maintaining the open seas. And as I think General Murugan again said, we have a conflict with China. Essentially, the conflict is civilizational rather than territorial, though we have problems on the border. And those of us who have had an opportunity to walk on the border, which I have when I was a young officer, it's very difficult to determine where exactly the border lies. And the border keeps changing from time to time. And the Chinese have maps for the border for every single dynasty. Fake, real, true, everything of the kind. So I think we want the United States, which will adhere to what we regard as the diplomatic norms of our nation-to-nation norms. I don't think we are going to get that from President Trump. How to deal with President Trump is going to be one of the biggest challenges that Indian leadership, and more particularly India's foreign policy leadership, will have to determine. I think he firmly believes that what he says is right, and if you don't agree with me, I think you're not. So what my reading of the discussion today has been is that we need to do re-verify our own thoughts and processes. We need much more concrete evidence that Trump is really interested in India's future relationship with it in the same manner that we have with the United States. I think at the moment, China is his enemy number one. But the Chinese are astute. They have dealt with countries globally over generations. And I'm sure that they will find a way to deal, because he's not a strategist, but as I said, he's a transactional expert. I think the Chinese would probably make better amends, or whatever you like to call it. So I think we are not in an easy place. I mean, India will have to deal with, as I said, India and China will always remain enemies. It's not the border dispute that is the enemy. It is a question of who is going to be the number one country, definitely as far as Asia is concerned. And so that is one. But with the United States, the seas around the South China Sea and the East China Sea, etc., kind of thing, and to some extent, trade issues will be there. I do feel that China will find a way to meet the demands of a transactional Trump, and whereas we will find it. I don't see any government in India acceding readily to the fact that Quad is a kind of a defense alignment or defense partnership, and that we will help police the seas. So I'm just, rather than talking about individual points that have been raised, I think we have a problem on our hands. How to deal with a President Trump who would not have a sense of history about what the relations between India and the United States were in the days gone by or recently, and how much of sacrifice the United States has made on many occasions. I think the US nuclear deal is the US deal, which we are beneficiaries of.
Sir, your views are from the top. So we are all extremely, I think these are stuff which we all needed to hear. That especially that China will probably be as transactional as anybody else. That's interesting. Gen Singh, I think Aparna wants to leave. If you have a question for her, I think you did. If anyone has a question, yeah.
So my first question is about securitization. Yesterday, the securitization of Quad came into discussion quite a bit in the CNAS. So Aparna and Lisa can throw some light on it. Is India going to face some pressure on that point as a transactional matter in a future Quad meeting? So Aparna, you could answer this and then leave, and Lisa can take on thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Lisa will be able to do a great job. I will just make one point. I mean, sort of of the three countries in the Quad, there's only one which is not a security ally, which is India. So at the end of the day, the other three countries know how to operate, know how to cooperate. Sort of my argument, about Quad, in the discussion yesterday, primarily was this: that for a president who believes that allies need to burden share, and one who does not really believe in public goods, and who sees hard power as power, that means economic, tech, and military. What is the benefit that Quad brings to the table according to him? So if it is economic, if it is trade, if it is military, it has to be in the language he understands.
Dr. Lisa, you could throw some light on it, and you have some more questions which I have for you. You could combine all of them. The other question is about the Russia factor. If if the Russian oil gets Russian shipping gets sanctioned, as the US has been saying that whatever ships which are fetching oil to countries like India from Russia, if they are sanctioned, what will be the implication? Do you think the President Trump is also going to follow on that, because that order was passed during the Biden's presidency? So, is this order going to be implemented, or it will be kept on the low burner? That was one issue which I thought even Richard could throw light on that, because this is something which and the recent order of curbing the external military aid. He has just uh, agreed to give aid to Israel and Egypt. Uh, so does that mean that Ukraine is out of the matrix?
It's an interesting question because, realistically, I think that, it's difficult to see that India would want to get involved, militarily, if there was a US-China conflict over Taiwan. I think India would be extremely reticent. India would be more focused on what's happening on its own border with China, and would not want to do anything provocative toward China. So I think that U.S. officials need to keep their expectations in check about what India would be willing to provide. On the second question of the military aid, all foreign aid has been suspended, all 70 billion, including foreign military financing, except for the exceptions are, as you said, Egypt, Israel, and now we know humanitarian aid has been accepted. So you're asking what will happen in terms of Ukraine. I can't really answer that directly. It's a great question. I would just again refer to the couple of tweets that we have seen from President Trump on Russia and Ukraine, which might be a little bit different than you would have expected. On the campaign trail, he talked a lot about, ending the war overnight, and but I think now that he's in his position, he recognizes not so easy, and he also recognizes that President Putin would have to make concessions for that to happen. So I think there's still broad bipartisan support for arming Ukraine, supporting Ukraine. So I think the fact that the aid has been stopped and is being reviewed doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be halted indefinitely. Third question was, will the Trump administration implement the sanctions against Russia that the Biden administration put in place? I think so. I think there's not going to be an effort to roll back sanctions against Russia unless Russia plays ball in terms of ending the conflict. But if things remain static, and we don't see any change in Russian behavior toward Ukraine, then I think we can expect the sanctions to stay in place. And there is expectation that India adheres to any sanctions that are put in place.
Richard, would you like to comment?
I'll touch on two things that came up. On Quad, I still find it's kind of surprising that people still talk about if and will the Quad move into security. It is deeply in military cooperation already. We saw that with the announcement a couple of years ago about the humanitarian assistance disaster relief work stream, which we know the first responders in a major crisis in the region are the navies. Coast Guard work has been spilled in, and they have semi-formal discussions about military cooperation interoperability. And even though we all consider, the Malabar is not a Quad exercise, it's the same for navies. So we're just kind of kidding ourselves by assuming, so it is moving pretty quickly, actually, into military cooperation. But I think, as other speakers have rightly said, we still have a big divergence of views on what the flashpoint is that we should focus on. For the United States and most of our partners, it's more about Pacific. And for India, for obvious reasons, it's China's emerging presence in the Indian Ocean. And I think, you see with the United States creating the Indian Ocean dialogue with India, steps like hosting the tri-service exercises which have happened in the Indian Ocean. When you read the Pentagon reports about China's militarization, the Indian Ocean is spelled out a lot more clearly in that now. So I think because of India's insistent nudging, more American security analysts have kind of that goal.
Okay, Richard, I think we've lost you. Yeah. So sorry about that. I think we should now close the discussion. I think we've really gone on more than a fair share, and our discussions and our speakers must be really tired of it. I think I'll hand over to General Dushyant Singh to thank you all. Really fantastic.
I think if we had carried on, we would have carried on for another hour or so. There were a host of questions, essentially because of the complexity and the ambiguity and uncertainty which has been created because of the changes which have occurred due to the change in the presidency in the United States of America, which is good also. And I tend to agree with certain statements of Raja Menon, who spoke yesterday, and he said that it is for the political leadership now to actually pave the way and do something big which can move India-US ties forward. With that, I would like to thank each one of you for having spared your valuable time and joined us in this discussion. We would be sharing your thoughts to the people concerned. Thank you, and Jai Hind to each one.